Right, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Very warm welcome from me on behalf of everyone here at Financial Times Strategies to those of you here in the room at Bracken House, the headquarters of the Financial Times here in London. And welcome, of course, to each and every one of the more than 1,000 of you who are joining us online, participating by live stream. We're delighted you've taken time out to attend today's report launch and hope you find the next 90 minutes to be both an interesting and a lively discussion. My name's Jim Egan. I'm a principal here at Financial Times Strategies. Not everyone's familiar with FTS. We're a specialist management consultancy focused on providing strategic advice and hands-on support to the news media and publishing sector. FTS brings together the experience of news professionals from both inside the Financial Times and elsewhere in the sector and combines this with best-in-class management consulting and data analytics expertise. We were launched in 2020 and we've now worked with more than 600 news and media companies around the world. And this rapid growth is thanks in no small part to our partnership with the Google News Initiative, with whom we share a crucial mission to support and enhance the sustainability of the news ecosystem. So thank you very much from us to everyone at GNI. The impact of artificial intelligence on the journalism sector is, of course, the most talked about strategic priority with the industry. And that's why you're all here at this evening's launch. In a few minutes, we'll be hearing both from Charlie Beckett and Mira Yassin, who will be presenting the findings of the report before moderating a panel discussion. But first, I'm going to hand over to Charlie's colleague, Shepo Shabalala, to say a few words of introduction on behalf of the LSE. Shepo.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. It's really great that we finally reached this point after a couple of 6 months of working on this report. My name is Tepo, and I'm the project manager for JournalismAI. So many of you would have interacted with me via email or via the newsletter. My job really is to thank everybody who's put or helped put this report together, really the London School of Economics and Political Science, as well as the Google News Initiative for supporting us for the past 5 years. Obviously, before the hype around artificial intelligence and generative AI. I'm standing here to thank all the parties involved, mostly David. David, thank you so much for coming on board at the beginning of this project. Brian and Jonathan from the LSE's design unit who've put together this amazing report. We have it in Spanish as well, so do download it on the website, as well as Charlotte, who's helped us with the PR and communications, as well as all the regional researchers who helped us reach all the corners of the globe to put this global survey and make it truly representative. And then, of course, a huge thank you to the 120 journalists who actually participated in the survey, journalists, data scientists, technologists, media makers from around the world. You really made time for us to talk to us and fill in the survey and make sure that this report came to fruition. And of course, a final thank you to all the invisible people, the people who proofread the report, who helped us translate it, peer-reviewed it, and of course, finally, to my team at JournalismAI, thank you so much. We can only hope that this report will help the journalism industry identify best practices, useful strategies, and pathways to efficiency and innovation. And now I would like to pass on the mic to David to say a few words.
Thank you, Tsepo. Thank you, Jim. Hello, everyone. Truly delighted to be joining you today for the launch of the JournalismAI report, this new global survey. I'm David Dieudonné. I'm with the News Lab, a team within the Google News Initiative, whose mission is to collaborate with journalists and entrepreneurs to drive innovation in news. Almost 5 years ago now, I had the privilege to join Charlie in launching JournalismAI, this unique effort that was continuously supported by the Google News Initiative to empower news organizations to use AI responsibly through research. And that's what we're here today training as well, and experimentation. This year is a big year for Journalism AI with a drumbeat of community activities affirming and confirming their success. First, the Journalism AI Fellowship, a scheme intended to provide a space where fellows can explore and experiment without the constraints of their day-to-day work. The Journalism AI Academy for Small Newsrooms, a program we piloted 2 years ago in Europe, Middle East and Africa, and expanded in the rest of the world to make sure not only big newsrooms had an opportunity to experiment with AI. And then a new self-paced training experience, the Journalism AI Discovery, which was developed in partnership with investigative data journalist and AI collaborator Brandon Roberts. And most importantly, a new iteration of the Journalism AI Global Survey on AI in the Newsroom, whose first edition, some of you were in London in 2019 for the release of that survey, which became the bedrock and the compass of the program. What are news organizations around the world doing with AI? What will they do in the future? What are their hopes, their fears of its impact on their sustainability and quality of this hard-pressed journalism industry? There could not be a better time to ask these questions again. For several years already, artificial intelligence has been a very fruitful field of experimentation for the media, both in terms of editorial matters and with regard to their economic model, as Journalism AI witnessed along the way. In recent months, we've seen an acceleration of use in AI across different industries and use cases, thanks to the increased maturity of new models capable of producing text or synthetic images. This fascinating journey shows how Journalism AI has been both a pioneer in this field and a very agile entity able to expand and adapt to the needs of the growing and diverse community it serves. Today, I'd like to extend my warmest thanks to the LSE team, Sabrina, Lakshmi, Anna, Mira, Fabio, Charlie, Seppo, and his predecessor, Mattia Peretti, who is in the room today, for their passion and their thoughtfulness in building and running this program for the past 5 years. It takes incredible work and attention to details to run Journalism AI day by day, and most importantly, to grow its now 8,000 plus community of learners and doers. So long live to the Journalism AI community. And now enjoy this video that we put together for celebrating the program.
Journalists around the world are under enormous pressure, but they've also got incredible new technologies that enable them to do their work in a way that I couldn't even imagine 15 years ago. How can artificial intelligence superpower the kind of journalism they want to do?
صراحة ما كنت أعرف شيء عن ال AI وكنت كتير خاف من الموضوع لأنه بالنهاية أنا صحفية مني حدا تكنولوجيست.
Yo tengo que estar muy enfocada en el día a día, en la noticia de último momento y en las tareas más repetitivas de la producción que nos quita tiempo para pensar a largo plazo.
En el periodismo de investigación se hace más necesario que nunca poder analizar y analizar rápido cantidades masivas de documentos.
At the LSE in London, you have a very strong sense of the power of these technologies and their potential. We've got the support of the Google News Initiative to really drive this onwards at scale. We are trying to help journalists use AI in a way that's going to support their editorial mission.
Queríamos saber si podíamos ayudar a otros medios y a otras periodistas a que supieran cómo se puede usar el análisis de imágenes satelitales con inteligencia artificial para entender mejor quiénes son las y los responsables de la crisis climática en el mundo. de saber que puedes analizar estos datos de una manera mucho más rápida, te permite saber que puedes llegar a desarrollar investigaciones que en otro momento no nos hubiéramos imaginado que fueran posibles.
ما في اطلاع كافي على انه الذكاء الاصطناعي شو ممكن يعمل بغرف الاخبار العربيه، انه الاي اي مش جاي ياخذ محلهم ولا جاي ياخذ دورهم ولا جاي يقضي على عملهم، بالعكس الاي اي جاي يساعدهم، كمان مما بيوفر علينا كثير بموضوع التكلفه الماديه والوقت كمان. نحن بأريج قبل ما نبلش بعالم الاي اي كامبلمنتيشن المفروض يكون عندنا استراتيجي، ومش بس نعمل استراتيجيه لنا نقدمها لوسائل الإعلام العربية الأخرى اللي يقدروا يستفيدوا منها.
Queríamos agregar mucha más representación e inclusividad a las diferentes tecnologías que están impulsadas por inteligencia artificial. Estas herramientas se nutren de lo que nosotros le damos. Entonces, esa colaboración fue bastante necesaria para hacer que proyectos sean más ricos en contextos y en culturas.
ما فينا نعمل كل شيء لحالنا، نحن بمرحلة من المراحل رح نحتاج نتعاون مع مؤسسات إعلامية أخرى بتواجه نفس التحديات اللي قلنا.
Una de las cosas más importantes que nos dio en JournalismAI es una comunidad de periodistas, editores.
معنا ناس من كود فور أفريقيا، نيجيريا، أرجنتينا، أوروبا.
You've got 6,000 people spread across the globe, coming from more than 100 different countries. So the network effect has been the fuel that drives this project. The world is changing. It's going to be much more AI driven, and it's vital that journalists have all the resources that they can get.
Thank you very, very much. It's a lovely film, and it only reminds me of how lucky I am with the people that I work with on this project around the world. Not just the team, the wonderful team, but the hundreds and hundreds of incredible journalists and technologists and all those other people doing inspirational work. And it cheers me up no end when I see it. This is Mira Yassin, who, I'll be honest, did most of the work on this research. Fantastic colleague, and we're going to go through the findings of this report. But I just wanted to say something that I don't think I need to tell you here in the room, or indeed the people watching this online. But as David alluded to, Jim as well, this has been an incredible year for artificial intelligence and journalism. And it builds on what has been, an exciting journey for us generally of over 5 years, and indeed for me, over 15 years really looking at technical innovation in journalism. But this year was extraordinary because generative AI, I am convinced, and I think the survey will help explain this, I am convinced that it is changing already journalism and will change journalism again in a very profound way. We're right in the middle of a hype cycle, aren't we? But I think a lot of it is justified. Not the stuff about the killer robots, particularly, or all your jobs are going to go. I don't think that hype is particularly justified. In fact, I think it's irrelevant and a distraction from the real incredible opportunities and indeed the risks and difficulties that AI generally brings, and generative AI in particular. So I think it really matters, and I'm glad that you care as well. So I'm going to hand over now to Mira. We're going to do a kind of joint act, like the Carpenters or something, where we're going to swap over. But Mira's going to take you through the, in fact, you have the click there. Mira's going to take us through the methodology and then the main findings.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mira Yassin. I'm the lead researcher and co-author of the JournalismAI report. Delighted to be here with you and to see the fruition of the work of 6 months. So this report is basically the culmination of the collection and analysis of the fascinating insights of more than 100 media organizations from 46 countries, a large jump compared to our report in 2019. So this year, we made it a point to reach a larger and more diverse group of media professionals. We collected insights from small and large media organizations, from nonprofit and profit platforms, as well as emerging and legacy organizations. We did this through surveys and interviews, and our insights were also supplemented by discussions we've had at conferences. Additionally, the responses were also very regionally diverse. They came in from Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East and North America, Asia Pacific, Europe, and North America. They also represent a diverse range of media, including broadcasters, newspapers, magazines, news agencies, publishing groups, and others like media development organizations. So, what are some of the key findings from this research? We first wanted to know how newsrooms are using AI, and we found that there's noticeable growth in AI integration among the newsrooms across the news value chain, be it in news gathering, news production, or news distribution. This is compared to what we saw in 2019. So 75% of the respondents said they're using AI in at least one of the areas. And they're using it in various ways, like trend detection or transcription, content personalization, and many other applications. On the future use of AI, the vast majority of respondents, around 80%, are expecting a larger role for AI in their newsroom. There were 4 primary applications that were mentioned for future AI integration: using AI to enhance fact-checking processes, content personalization and optimizing distribution, and using generative AI technologies to generate text, like summaries and headlines, and finally, using chatbots to help journalists conduct preliminary interviews and gauge public sentiment on issues. On developing an institutional AI strategy, newsrooms have a variety of approaches, and this depends on their size, mission, and access to resources. Around a third told us that they do have an AI strategy or are currently working on developing one. For some early adopters, they are focusing now on achieving interoperability since they've been working with AI for a few years. Other newsrooms have adopted a case-by-case approach, and some media development organizations are relating their AI strategies to making them accessible in order to build capacity in regions where there's low AI literacy. But across the board, there's a need for continuous review and improvement. So what challenges are newsrooms facing in their AI integration journeys? We found that financial constraints and technical challenges remain key to AI adoption, and sometimes these challenges overlap. Technical challenges sometimes stem from a lack of resources. So for smaller and emerging news organizations, they often struggle to allocate the necessary resources to hire qualified personnel, to implement and maintain these systems, but also to design and implement upskilling programs in AI. So it follows then that training in AI literacy and AI literacy skills and technologies remains important. Respondents believe that training would help mitigate some of the challenges we just discussed. And AI literacy training continues to be an objective for less resourced newsrooms and ones that are still at the beginning of their AI journeys. Again, for early adopters, discussions around training this year focused on specific and nascent skills like prompt engineering and large language models, as well as multidisciplinary training across various departments to enhance interoperability. So far, the questions I've presented were all addressed in our 2019 survey, but what we certainly did not address back then was generative AI technologies, which became accessible only almost a year ago with the launch of OpenAI's ChatGPT. But despite their novelty, a large number of organizations that we talked to, around 85%, said they have at least experimented with general AI technologies in various ways and at various degrees. So these are some examples from the survey that demonstrate the different approaches to generative AI technologies. Some organizations have fully embraced generative AI in generating copy, such as in producing summaries, while others are a bit more apprehensive about using them in editorial tasks. So they focus instead on using them in search engine optimization, data analysis, writing code, and other areas. In some regions, like the MENA region, ChatGPT is used in media literacy training to demonstrate its shortcomings, such as some inaccuracies in Arabic. And although most newsrooms have not had enough time to build comprehensive assessments of generative AI integration, there's a consensus. More than 70% of our respondents think that they do present new opportunities other AI technologies have not presented. They mentioned the affordances of generative AI technologies, such as their higher accessibility compared to other AI tech, and lower requirements for technical skills. However, they're more divided about the challenges, as Charlie will explain.
I get to do the difficult bit. Yeah, exactly. I think what's clear about this is that these bar charts give an impression of a kind of very rational process. If you're actually going to visit a newsroom or talk to a newsroom about, especially Gen AI, there's a kind of virtual hysteria, actually. You know, there's a kind of cross between exhilaration at the power of it and fear, you know, panic about the possible downsides. And I think that explains when they say challenges, that yes, 40% says yes, it creates challenges. And I think the 50% are not sure. What they mean by that is they're pretty convinced it does, but they don't even know what those challenges are going to be. One of the big challenges, and I think this is absolutely key to anybody who's interested in good journalism, is around accuracy, of course. And these are a couple of responses of people who had tried to use it and possibly expected too much of it. You know, they expected it to be some kind of truth machine, when, of course, as we know, it's just a language machine. And so it's great that they're trying, and it's great that they've identified the mistakes, and it's even better that they haven't ploughed on with using it and then compromising their standards. Ethical concerns, and by ethical I sort of mean editorial as well as, you know, moral concerns or political concerns. Lots of those. They sort of divide into generic concerns generally about technology and artificial intelligence in particular, you know, things like discriminatory data and so on. And then there are the more specific ones that apply to journalism. One of them is the sort of black box nature of AI systems and of algorithmic bias. And I think the new generative AI, in a way, it's just as impenetrable. In fact, it's even more mysterious in some ways how it works. The difference is, of course, the actual UX is much easier for us to, even if you're not technologically gifted, anyone can use the thing. And in that sense, you can kind of train yourself, and to a degree, you can train the technology. Then there's that challenge of upholding journalistic values, like transparency, accountability, and accuracy. Lots of conversations going on with people thinking about what they're supposed to do with transparency, for example. Should you bother to tell your audience that you've been using these tools? People were concerned that it could amplify existing trends and negative trends. For example, obviously the sort of commercialization, there's incredible competitive pressures, and AI technologies are going to multiply that competition, I think. I think journalism is going to face even more competition from other sources. And some of those other sources, of course, are going to be bad people creating bad content, propaganda, hate speech, disinformation. And that's not directly our concern, but we are swimming in the same waters, if you like. We're operating in the same information ecosystem. And to a degree, many people here will be fact-checking, seeking to counter disinformation, and of course, trying to stress the authenticity of your own work. And again, so we can see how AI can amplify those bad trends, but also provide tools for us to do the good work. Generally, the people were worried also just about, again, this sort of decline in public confidence in journalism, you know, the sense that they won't trust you more necessarily if they think you're using this technology. And sheer pace of change is obviously a big theme. We all know how rapidly this has emerged, far more rapidly than any other serious media technology in the last few decades. It took us about 20 years once the internet happened from news to go online properly. This has happened overnight, almost literally, and it's changing constantly. Anybody who used, I don't know, DALL-E or Midjourney, when you first used it back in the winter, it was like a children's painting, wasn't it? A kid's drawing. Now it's stunningly impressive and convincing. And that change, who knows how exponential that change is going to be in the future. But I think we do have to build in our response a flexibility and an awareness of how this is going to continually reiterate itself. Issues also around dependence on the technology and the technology companies, and just generally the sustainability challenge. And by that, they mean, you know, will this help my business model or will it hinder? I can see huge efficiencies around particular workflows, but there are also costs in terms of recruitment, in terms of the actual technology itself. So how will it help on that? And the great news, or the good news, I think, is that despite the speed, rapidity, and difficulty and complexities, people are addressing as much as they can some of these ethical concerns. There is a desire to be more transparent, not just externally, but internally as well, having proper conversations between the different parts of your organization. There are already people publishing excellent guidelines. The FT has put out its guidelines. There's some really good ones. Some are very long and complicated. Some are very short and pithy. And the best ones have, again, built into them this idea that it's going to change, and what you do with it will change. So the guidelines might have to adapt as well. The best ones, also, the best practice is always to keep the human in the loop. There are going to be some very basic functions where AI will operate semi-autonomously, you know, easy stuff to do. But generally, there has to be input from your news organization at the beginning, while it's running, and then reviewing and editing, just as you would with any other process in the newsroom. And the other interesting way that people are, and Saja spoke about it on the video, I'm seeing a very healthy trend towards collaboration. People collaborating much more within newsrooms, not just leaving it to the IT department, for example, but also even between news organizations increasingly, and indeed with other institutions like university think tanks, like us. And about 40% of them said that in a funny way, and this is sort of counterintuitive, their approach to AI hadn't changed that much. You know, old-fashioned AI, generative AI comes, and this hadn't changed that much. But that was mainly because it's just hit them. So they're still working out how they should respond. It's not that they don't think that they have to change. So that's going to be really interesting over the next year or so, how that emerges. I'll hand back now to you to do the global bit. Thank you.
So if you read the report, you'll see that we've used the global south, global north distinction throughout. And this is because we wanted to adopt a power-conscious framing of AI development and adoption. We think this is necessary if we're really serious about benefiting from AI in an equitable manner. But of course, this doesn't mean that these regions are monolithic. as they include politically and socially diverse countries. So although in most cases, classic colonialism has ended, many countries in the global south still grapple with its repercussions and grapple with new forms of colonialism that may be less visible. So as a result, the social and economic benefits of AI remain geographically concentrated in the global north. In the past few years, there's been a growing number of scholars who have warned that the impact of AI is repeating the patterns of colonial history, where the powerful and the wealthy become rich at the expense of the poor. So to give you an example, in Venezuela, data labeling companies have exploited the economic crisis in the country, and they've created a new model for labor exploitation, where Venezuelan data annotators, whose work is imperative for compiling and labeling the data, which create the building blocks for the AI systems, were paid very little for their work. And on a larger scale, if we think about the metaphor we often hear, that data is the new oil, that it is free for appropriation, this metaphor reminds us of how colonialism logic works, as it views land and resources of other peoples as available for appropriation. This dynamic is not unique to the global south, but we see it more clearly in the global south because it's more vulnerable and because the power imbalance there is more obvious. So how does global AI disparity manifest, and what kind of additional challenges do global south countries contend with in the newsroom? To begin with, some regions do struggle with low internet penetration rates, and this is a result of economic realities and poor infrastructure. At the same time, technology companies usually invest the vast majority of their resources in Western markets, which means that most AI tools are made for Western English speakers. As a result, the tools that are made in other languages or for other accents tend to be a lot less reliable. This is an example with transcription tools, for instance, where even English speakers with non-Western accents told us that they've noticed a lot of inaccuracies. So necessarily, algorithmic bias is a larger problem, and the harms of AI disproportionately affect marginalized communities and communities in global south countries. Another thing is we saw in the responses that there's a considerable level of distrust in both the developers of the AI systems and the large-scale adopters. Some tech companies are seen as aligned with non-democratic governments in some regions, like MENA. And as for adopters, many media organizations that are considered well-resourced are also considered to be mouthpieces of governments or funded by governments, and they are the most likely to benefit from AI technologies. So along the same lines, government control and surveillance concerns were very present in responses from global south countries. But this is not unique to the global south. Possibly because the power imbalances are more obvious, this concern was more common. This is an example from Arij, Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism, a media training hub in the Arab region, that sums up some of the issues with AI disparity. And as Charlie was just saying, mentions cross-regional collaboration as a potential solution to mitigate AI disparity and to try to benefit more equitably from AI. So what has changed and what have we seen before in these results? If we compare with the results in 2019, we can say that increasing efficiency remains a main driver for AI integration. Journalists hope that they can automate mundane tasks and free themselves to do more creative and innovative work. Approaches to AI strategy continue to vary widely, and this depends on various factors like their mission, access to resources, and size. We cannot discount fears of job replacement, but there's also a view that AI is helping augment roles within the newsroom. And as we mentioned, financial and technical challenges remain the most pressing, but the ethical concerns are still very significant. We can actually sum them up with the question of how can journalists integrate AI in their work while continuing to uphold journalistic values like accountability, transparency, and fairness, especially for a profession that is rooted in serving the public interest. More similarities with 2019. Respondents both expect AI to help mitigate disinformation and also make it worse. There is still a tension between journalism and tech, and finding a balance between them is still a priority. As we just discussed, the benefits of AI continue to be unevenly distributed. And we have some concerns about the role of tech companies. So while respondents acknowledge the value of innovations tech companies create, they also worry that it creates some sort of dependence that forces news organizations to embrace technologies and struggle with keeping pace with them. There were some calls from our respondents on technology companies to be more transparent about the data that they use to create these models, as well as how these models operate. And collaboration was also key here, and they hoped that technology companies would collaborate with civil society and government to make sure that their technologies are aligned with humanistic values. And building on that point, collaboration among newsrooms as well, some that share similar challenges, and with other players like universities, is seen as key to confronting shared challenges and lessening AI disparity. What about the new results that we saw? Well, this sample was much more diverse in terms of size, region, mission, and business model. There's a lot of emphasis on cross-department collaboration and institutional approaches, especially among early adopters who are focusing on achieving interoperability now that they've been engaging with AI for several years. And even when they discussed training, they discussed AI literacy training, but also training on nascent technologies like prompt engineering and large language models. The majority think that generative AI technologies do present a new set of opportunities that other AI technologies have not presented, and most of them have already experimented with generative AI. And last but not least, a recap of the key findings and next steps.
Yeah, and as Mira just pointed out, in some ways there's continuities in how news organizations are approaching generative AI, and there are some differences as well, but I think it's worth trying to outline, what are the kind of key steps that we think, based on the survey, but also based on the conversations we've been having with news organizations about how they've been approaching generative AI in particular. How can you have an AI strategy? In some ways, we just reduced it to these simple 6 steps. The first one, which we said in the first report, which is basically just get informed, that if you only read the news stories about generative AI, then you really would think it was a bunch of killer robots and psychopaths, when in fact it is, of course, a tool that can do particular things, some well, some not so well. And it is incredibly diverse. There are many companies who have created large language models, and there are thousands of companies offering use cases for it. So the first step for everyone really is to get informed at a basic level, at least, about the technology, to try and get past some of those myths and some of those fears. The second one is to broaden, this is a slightly different thing, is to broaden AI literacy within your newsroom or your news organization. And by literacy, I mean knowledge that gives you agency. So you're able to make choices. You're able to start identifying the things that you could do or want to do using these technologies. And again, I think this has to be quite broad. The good thing about GenAI is that everyone can play with it, as I keep saying. Some people have to have high levels of knowledge about it, but generally the literacy should be shared because it's going to impact on every part of your news processes. Then surely everyone should be able to have that conversation. Assign responsibility. Again, most of the good news organizations that I've talking to have got, AI working parties. Some poor sod who's been told that they're in charge of generative AI and they have to go and play with ChatGPT and so on all day. And they have to think of ways, or ideally as a group, thinking of ways forward in an organization, but having that responsibility for the process. Go back one. Then the usual, in a sense, of test, iterate, and repeat. Some of these technologies are going to be kind of off the peg, but the application within your particular context is critical, and it is a human-in-the-loop process. It's about thinking about why you're going to use a particular tool, say, then thinking about how it's going to fit into your production flows or how those flows may have to change. And then reviewing the impact, reviewing the return on investment or the efficacy of any particular system or tool. And guidelines are going to be really helpful. We've mentioned the FT guidelines. There are tons of guidelines out there. It's up to you for how specific they're going to be or how prescriptive or whatever. But just having that process of drawing up guidelines, I think in itself is a really valuable way to get people to buy in to the process, into the technology. And it also allows people to express either their enthusiasm or more likely perhaps their concerns and anxieties around the AI coming into their work. And the sixth one is, keep saying it again, but this idea of collaboration and networking. I mean, like the guidelines, we're talking about internal as well as external. Guidelines are for your staff, but they're also for your users or your customers, whatever. The same with collaboration and networking. It's about internal collaboration and networking, making sure you're having a proper conversation. And of course, that's quite novel for news organizations. We're not really used to doing that. We're very can-do, we're very hierarchical, we're very focused on outcomes. But I think it's really important, and I see encouraging signs of people being more interested in the process collaboratively across an organization and network externally as well, and continue to keep doing this. Because as I keep saying, you're not going to fix your AI strategy anytime soon. You'll get one, and then it may have to change and it may have to adapt because the technology will. And more importantly, I think the whole journalism landscape, the information landscape in the marketplace is going to change as well. So that's our report. Thank you very much for listening to that bit.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mira. I'm now going to ask three wonderful people who are actually doing this in real life to come up. We've got Maryam from the BBC. Would you like to come up here? George, who's with FTstrategies. And over there, come here, Jane Barrett from Reuters. Where do you want to be? Do you go in the middle?
That's impossible.
Okay, so in a moment you'll get a chance to ask questions if you want to ask questions related to the report or generally about the topic. So I'll bring you in later. But first of all, I want to start with a really obvious question that I don't know about you, but this has been a crazy year for me personally, just trying to keep up with what's been happening around the world, as you see, where we operate globally. So what have you been doing this year?
It's a good question. It sounds a bit like I'm in an annual performance review with my boss. So it has been a really interesting year. I'll just briefly describe my role at the BBC, and then I'll talk a little bit about the ways that I interact with AI on an everyday basis. So I'm a strange, interesting cross between a data scientist and a journalist.
and I'm in the BBC's data journalism team based here in London. And in practice, what that means is we use a combination of statistics together with programming languages like Python and R. And for any techies here, I fall very much into the Python camp. And we use these tools together with good old-fashioned traditional journalism skills to find news in messy data sets and then present that in a way that the public finds interesting and accessible. So on a daily basis, a good 70% of the kind of work that I do actually does not involve AI or machine learning, to call it by its slightly less exciting name, at all. So that hasn't really changed given all of these exciting developments. So a lot of the work that I do, and again, any techies will know the pain, is just grabbing data from different sources, cleaning it up using whatever programming tools we can get our hands on, and then visualizing it and analyzing it using simple statistics. I would say the other 30 to 40% of what I do involves slightly fancier statistics or machine learning. And that splits into two main camps. So first off, we use machine learning and AI tools to make our workflows as journalists and as investigative journalists more efficient, which is one of the use cases that was mentioned in the report. So that could be using optical character recognition to take a bunch of nasty images that have been scanned into a PDF and extracting the text and data from them to speed up our analysis of that data. That could be using machine learning and very, very simple models like linear regression, those nice straight line models that we all remember from school. That could be using models like these to understand relationships that are occurring in the real world. So just to pick a fictional example, if I wanted to understand the factors that are driving variations in exam results, I might use a really simple straight line model to understand that relationship. So I guess part of the problem with these techniques is that I wouldn't really call them machine learning. I'd call them fancy statistics. But technically, I guess they do fall into that camp of machine learning, or if you really want to stretch it, AI. And increasingly, the kinds of tools that we're using to perform nastier data cleaning tasks like optical character recognition, understanding large amounts of messy text using natural language processing, those kind of are more on the advanced end of the spectrum increasingly. The other ways that we interact with AI is sort of flipping it on its head and investigating the algorithms themselves. And as we have machine learning and automated decision-making being used across the public and private sector in ways that are increasingly really affecting the lives of ordinary people, it's an important part of our role as tech literate journalists to start to shed some light on those algorithms and on those systems. So the other half of what we do is trying to find interesting and creative ways to really look under the hood at how these algorithms work and really analyze them in some sort of meaty, substantial way and try to uncover how these systems work and where those biases and inequalities might be. So that's a quick summary of the kind of stuff that I've been working on.
It's very, very impressive. Thank you. Jane, you're less of a techie person, more of a strategy person.
Yes.
Has the strategy had to be looked at again in the last 12 months, particularly, or what?
Yeah, I mean, we're constantly kind of reviewing strategy around AI. I think the kind of key things that I've been working on this year, if I do my annual appraisal with Charlie, it kind of fits into three kind of main categories, right? So the first has been around what are the guidelines, what's going to be the governance, what are the parameters which we're setting around the use of AI in the newsroom. And I think that's a really important piece of it, because it actually works for a company like Reuters to put those principles underneath, which then will act as the foundation of whatever we build on top of it. So there's been a big piece of work around, what do we think about this? How will we use it? Will we use it, or will we kind of go more towards the Guardian's way of to not? And kind of where do we sit on the spectrum of that? So there's a big piece of big picture thinking and guidance work that we've been doing this year. The second bit then is kind of the experimenting and playing. And that kind of is in three main camps. It's experimenting and playing ourselves, but then working in a very much, as your report said, like in a cross-disciplinary team within Reuters. So we have a team that is editorial, applied innovation, business development and strategy, and product, where we are just trying things out. We've got a couple of proofs of concept working. One's done incredibly well. One's proving much harder to get through. Which is really interesting. So we're learning a lot through that. But then also the third part of that experimentation piece is speaking to lots of other people who are working in AI, right? So as you're saying about how we're all sharing knowledge, I've sat through so far, where are we? Wednesday evening, and I've had 3 different startup pitches this week so far, which is great, you know, meeting loads of different people with different ideas, some of which are potentially very relevant to us, some of which are definitely not relevant to us. But I think, you know, there's a honor amongst thieves here, right? We're all trying to find our way. So kind of the guidance and principles piece, then the experimenting and playing piece. And then the third piece that we're kind of really moving into heavily now is that implementation and integration piece. So what does it take to train journalists in using AI? What do they need to know and what don't they need to know? What should sit with editorial and what should sit with technology? How are we going to track the different prompts that we're using? Where, you know, who are the early adopters in the newsroom who can really start to play with these things and develop really, really good prompts or really good ideas that actually we can then integrate? To what extent do we need to integrate into the production tools that we already use? And to what extent are we just happy to use third-party tools? So all of those sorts of questions now is kind of what we're really grappling with. And a lot else besides, but 3 things usually work. So I'll stick with 3.
We'll come back in more detail on how it's actually playing out. George, you've been doing some interesting work, haven't you, to find out more from the kind of audience perspective of what they think about this?
Yeah, I think similarly we could be split into 3 camps, I guess, which is so I work at FTstrategies. We are part of the FT, but I'm not talking on behalf of the FT today in terms of like what we're doing with AI. But the one thing that we're focused on is the AI applications in the context of the business of journalism more than the practice of journalism. So the first thing is learning what the FT are doing and thinking. You know, we're constantly experimenting. We're creating those guidelines, as you say, and we think there's lots of benefit in being very open about what we're doing and sharing that with both our clients and the industry. So that's one piece that's been a focus. The second thing is, I think there's lots of really practical ways AI can already be used right now in terms of the business of journalism. So we've practically, for example, helped our clients build propensity models that understands which segments of their audiences are most likely to churn. And then you adapt your messaging or your pricing to that cohort or that segment. So we've been doing a lot of practical implementation bit with the more traditional side of things. And then the third is just like learning about generative AI and what that could mean, and talking to smart people like yourselves, listening to startups making pitches about the endless possibilities, and just kind of like trying to imagine, especially from outside the industry, like use cases that could be applied in the context of journalism as well. But as you said, maybe we can come back to this, is, you know, I always think that these kind of conversations are grounded in like, what could we do? But as journalists and the business of journalism, we always end up realizing we should probably think of this from the perspective of the audience and the reader. And that always seems to come last. And so what I'm trying to think of is like, what are the reader needs right now that could help be solved through the use of this new technology? And I think that gets us to better places faster.
Have you got any idea what they are?
Beginnings? Yeah, so we're running a project at the moment called Next Gen News, which we're working with the Medill School of Journalism in Northwestern, and also the Google News Initiative as well. And we're interviewing 18 to 24-year-olds. And I think in the digital news report recently, there's like a degree of skepticism around personalization. And yes, old personalization, I think there's like some concerns about what that could lead to. But also there is still a continued desire amongst younger people in particular to filter information on their behalf, but also to give them control over that filtering of information. So like for me, that leads to really exciting opportunities when it comes to both traditional and generative AI in terms of how can we build greater customization, layering on top AI to improve the customer experience?
Maryam, you were saying that there's a limit to what AI can do and the definition of what that is anyway. But I wonder what you were thinking about the potential of, for example, generative AI in the future. I'm thinking also because there's a tendency to think, it's going to be creating this new amazing tool, but I wonder if it's actually just going to be a kind of a series of tools that support your work rather than some magical thing that does the investigative journalism for you.
Yeah, it's absolutely not going to replace the work or the expertise of investigative journalists. So at the BBC at the moment, and again, big disclaimer that I'm speaking in personal capacity, and I'm not a honcho or a big wig of any kind. I'm not even a medium wig at the BBC. So I'm talking in a personal capacity, and this actually links in nicely to the work that I'm doing as part of my Google News Initiative fellowship, which allows for a lot more experimentation and tinkering around without needing to necessarily worry about whether there'll be a hard specific output at the end. So for me, I think some of the most exciting use cases for generative AI are less the ones that we hear being talked about the most. So is generative AI going to replace the work of the journalists who are doing the writing up of articles? I don't think that's going to be the case, certainly not at large news organizations. But I do think there's a lot of potential for them to aid the work of investigative journalists. So one of the things that I've been playing around with together with George and our colleagues on the Journalism AI project is how generative AI text models can be used to make sense of large amounts of text. And again, this is kind of flipping the purpose of these models on their head. Instead of asking them to give us text, we are giving them text and asking them to make sense of those pieces of text. So as part of this project, we are trying to make sense of one of my favorite political data sets of all time. And I guess if I ever gave off the impression of being very cool, I've just destroyed that by admitting that I have favorite data sets. But I think this is a safe space to admit that. So we are analyzing the register of MPs' interests using generative AI models. So for anyone that's not aware, this is a fortnightly data set that contains information about all of the additional financial interests of members of parliament in the UK. So extra donations, freebies, side hustles, all of that goes into this register in varying degrees of horrible free text formats. So we're using ChatGPT and experimenting with other GenAI models to try and get some structure out of those data sets. So I think that's one really exciting, promising use of generative AI for investigations. Unfortunately, like any automated tool, it needs a lot of spot checking and it doesn't get it right all the time. So we are having a lot of fun trying to figure out what the best and most robust way is to check the output of this model and to make sure it's accurate. And that is probably going to end up being some horrible, messy combination of spot checking, having humans in the loop in other ways, extensive reviews of trial data, and so on. The other application that I think is really interesting for generative AI is, again, in investigations, but I can imagine a world where if I wanted to investigate bias in the rental market, for example, and I wanted to ask 1,000 estate agents if they would rent to me posing as a 35-year-old man who works in the city, and I wanted to ask those 1,000 estate agents again if they would rent to me posing as a 25-year-old single mum who's claiming benefits. We don't have the resource to do that manually, but that is exactly the sort of task where generative AI might come in handy.
It's a great story idea there for somebody to follow up on, isn't it? Yeah, and the work you're doing is amazing. And you will be able to see the results of it by December.
Hopefully,
yes. When we have our AI festival in December, and all the wonderful fellows will be presenting the work that they've been doing. Jane, I wondered how much, the Reuters people, the people that you work with, how they're responding to this? Is it a kind of weariness that here we go again? Jane's going to make us do digital things. How are you doing the cultural bit?
Yeah, it's a really good question because I think this is going to be like the third big change I've had to manage through Reuters. So I carry the scars already, and I'm just going to open them all again. But this time it does feel a little bit different insofar as I think before people felt that I was doing something to them, whereas now people think that I'm helping them deal with something else that's being done to them, right? I think I sound horrible, don't I? Sorry. But I think there's a general awareness and a recognition that generative AI is going to change a lot of how we live and work. Our CEO, Steve Hasker, actually said on a Thomson Reuters town hall the other day that he thinks that generative AI is going to be a bigger change to the world than the arrival of the internet. One couldn't have happened without the other, but nonetheless, I mean, I think it shocked quite a few people on the call of just thinking, well, hang on a second, I thought it was something that I was just going to play with over here. You mean it's actually going to transform everything? And so I think that what we're seeing in the newsroom is a few things. So there's a natural skepticism and concern, as you'd expect from journalists. We're paid to be skeptical and concerned. So I think that you get that a lot from quite a lot of the senior people thinking, well, hang on a second, we're 172 years old. We've got a reputation and a brand to keep. We don't want generative AI suddenly to ruin that. Like, what the hell is going to be going on? So that's a kind of a matter then of kind of constant communication, constant education, constant conversation about what's happening, how things are changing day by day, week by week, month by month. You've then got a group of people who are very keen beans, really good early adopters, who some of whom have just gone off and played by themselves within the guidelines, and some of whom, when you give them an opportunity, throw up their hands, right? So David, who's sitting over there, did us a fantastic workshop last Friday, and we had space for 15 people, and we had 120 applicants within 24 hours. So, you have like an early adopter, like, I'm really keen, I need to know this, I want to play, I want to understand how to do it. And then in between those two, you kind of have a swathe of people thinking, it's coming, but I don't have time to deal with it. I think one of the ladies in your video said exactly that, right? Like, we're so busy as journalists, we don't have time to take the step back and really to think about the bigger picture, the longer term. What I'm really interested by is that I don't see very many people, I'm not hearing very many people, maybe they're just the silent naysayers who are saying that we shouldn't be using it. It shouldn't come into newsrooms. Go away. You are a witch. I'm going to throw, you're a vampire. I'm going to throw garlic at you, whatever it is. And that's really interesting because in previous transformations, I have had that. So maybe that's coming, but it's kind of interesting. It's not yet.
Do you remember the Our Bloggers Journalist route? That argument as if that was a real thing, and I don't detect that. I detect a lot of different kinds of anxiety about it, and I think we should be. I mean, the tech companies are anxious about it as well. They're very
absolutely
clear about that. So it's good to be careful. But I agree with you. I think there's not the same kind of barriers going up. George, what do you think? How do you think that companies should be approaching this? And with what degree of seriousness? You're looking at it a little bit more objectively. I know you're based here, and in a way, you're based in this wonderful organization, which is, very quite well resourced, has got a good history of being innovative, and you've got a fantastic editorial brand. So in a way, you're in a luxurious position. What's your advice to people in less fortunate situations?
Yeah, I think your advice at the top is very sound. I think test, iterate, repeat is a great way to think about things. Don't throw absolutely everything at this. Like, I feel like all of us on stage have probably become overly obsessive with this as a topic. Let's hope the business isn't the same, because the business needs to continue running, right? It's not going to replace the need for reader revenue for companies like ourselves, So that's one important thing. I think the other way we always approach anything like this is trying to connect it to the overall goals of the organization, i.e. the commercial goals. It's really easy to just start doing stuff for the sake of it. Like, oh, cool, we've got this new application. It kind of reminds me of like 5 to 10 years ago when suddenly new startups came around and we were like, oh, cool, they can do marketing automation. And like, we would just kind of pick the first one and run with it. And we'd then be like, what is this actually like helping us to achieve? We've just spent loads of money on a license for marketing automation, but I'm not actually seeing any increase in audience engagement or any of our critical business metrics that we're actually trying to achieve. So when we think about this, you might be, if you follow FTstrategies, sick to death with our like North Star framework that we always talk about. But the idea is that essentially you take your commercial goal as an organization or your mission, if you're more mission driven. And then you think about what are the key like KPIs or outcomes that we want to achieve to meet that goal. And then you work down from that and build experiments around achieving your goals. So if you do want to grow loyalty amongst your audience, or you do want to reach a greater number of people, then how can AI experimentation help you achieve that goal rather than just starting from the point of what can AI do? Let's do it.
Right.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
I think also it's like the North Star thing, I think absolutely right. And then also kind of what are the values that are really, really important to you, and be able to measure the outcomes of whatever you're getting through AI against those kind of core values. Because I think otherwise you end up, as you say, ending up building lots of features which are kind of cool, but utterly useless and quite distracting.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got time for some questions. If you'd like to put your hand up and wake straight in there. Down the front, I think we've got a microphone somewhere. Is that right? Do we have a microphone? If not, here we go. Shepard's got one, never mind.
Hi, so fantastic conversation and great speakers. This year has been crazy, especially at Journalism AI with all the updates and the hype circle. I am actually a data analytics intern at the FT, but my background is in like policy, and so that kind of informs this question. I was wondering, in the presentation you gave, you spoke about transparency and the transparency we need from tech companies and AI, like OpenAI and ChatGPT, the transparency we need from them. I was wondering, would it be in the interest of Journalism AI to pursue some policy interest to kind of drive that conversation, request more transparency? I mean, you have this amazing community, amazing backing from so many different media organizations all over the world. I just feel like you would have the manpower in a way to kind of like, you know.
It's very sweet of you to think you've got a lot of manpower. My two colleagues over there, Lakshmi and Sabrina, will be thinking, oh my God, no, not more. To be honest with you, just speaking from the Journalism AI point of view, I think it's absolutely a really important issue, a whole set of issues, and it's going to be so diverse. There's not just one tech company. There's loads of tech companies, and there's loads of different scenarios legally, constitutionally, whatever, around the world that varies so much. The issues themselves are incredibly complicated. It's very easy to say, I want some transparency. What do you actually mean by that? You know, do you want to, you're going to even understand it if they gave you algorithms? You know, they don't necessarily always understand it. So I think it's actually a very, very big and difficult set of issues. We all love transparency, but I'm not sure in itself it will address some of the problems we're talking about. And the short answer is, I think it's such a big issue that my organization can't cope with it. You know, and also I think it's a policy issue. We are much more newsroom orientated, so we raise it, you know, in our surveys, in our conversations, and so on. And it's definitely part of a dialogue we have with our friends in the tech companies. But actually, no, I'll leave that to other people to do much better than I could. Any other questions at the back? Chepo? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. So I'm an investigative tech journalist investigating the technology industry, and obviously AI is the hot new thing. We are doing stories looking at this, and people have talked about data labeling basically as in the presentation. Fundamentally, a lot of data labeling is exploitative and is a requirement of all of these models. We've also got the algorithmic bias, which we know is inherent in these models, and we don't precisely know what it's doing to the outputs. We've got guidelines, that's great, but anyone using any of the LLMs at the moment is to some extent using products that what we do know is that they are morally compromised. and we don't know how morally compromised they are because we can't see exactly how they were trained. How do we deal with that? Is that a moral quandary we should be paying even more attention to, given everyone's experimenting with them now?
Get you two to answer this, because you're both you're public service organization, and obviously you're, a wonderful, upstanding organization and person. So,
sure. So I agree that it's important to understand how these models work under the hood and how they're put together. And I think one of the ways that we can do that as journalists, as I was saying earlier, is alongside reporting in a qualitative way on the fact that a lot of the ways that these models are trained is exploitative, and reporting qualitatively on the fact that a lot of these models can be biased, really trying to get under the hood in a robust technical way and trying to design experiments that unpick how these models might work. And I've seen some really nice examples of that kind of journalism in the States. ProPublica have done some really good work on how an algorithm called Compass works, which tries to predict the chance that somebody is going to reoffend if they're released on bail. And they did that in a really amazing, creative way using freedom of information requests. I think there's also interesting ways that we can try to feed data into models and measure the output. And if we design those experiments carefully, that can help us sort of reverse engineer how the black box might be working. So short answer, yes, I think it's really important for us to pay attention to this and to report on it as journalists. And I think absolutely it matters that the way these models might be trained and LLMs might be trained is, in a lot of cases, really exploitative.
I entirely agree. Couldn't put it better. I'll take the slightly harder bit of your question, because I totally agree with that bit, in terms of should we use them if we know that they're morally compromised. And I think my answer there is we still use Twitter/X, and we still use Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, and we know that they're morally compromised as well. But we've used them to grow our audiences and get journalism to different audiences and hopefully build our brand and get some, interest in our journalism. So I think that in a way it's not a dissimilar relationship. I think the key thing is that we never give the keys to our reporting or to our relationship with our audiences over to these companies, that we use them as a tool to achieve what we want to do journalistically and what we want to do with our clients, and that we've kind of, again, that human in the loop, or that accountability piece of really making sure that the output is sound, right? And it's going to require quite a lot of extra work in these early days to check and to recheck and to recheck. So will probably take us longer to generate things from AI at the beginning, because we're going to be so jolly cautious about it until it's got up to, again, on those measures of the values that we have, until it's up at the right level on those values. And even then, and I think that kind of comes back to the transparency point, if you're going to take off the human in the loop, is being really transparent with your users as to this has been done by AI. We have not been involved, i.e. caveat emptor.
Okay, we've got time for another one. Sorry.
Thank you. This question is for the co-authors of the report and all the panelists present. First of all, thank you so much for shedding light on such wonderful topics. I wanted to ask that what stood out to you as some of the most surprising or unexpected things from the report, from the findings of the report? There's a perception of journalists and people in general to AI. Does that seem a little surprising, or was there a more expected thing going into a survey like this?
Were you surprised about the report?
I think the number that surprised me was the 40% number. I think that you hadn't done anything. I think, what was that, since the last report and this report, or not moved anything
I think
forward?
It meant that they hadn't come to a next point. They were still kind of hadn't done anything. They hadn't changed their strategy as such.
I see. Yeah. And I mean, obviously that's really surprising. I think GenAI is making everyone reconsider their AI related strategy. So yeah, I thought that was very surprising.
Bear in mind that I remember when we did the first report, I remember asking a newsroom, do you have an AI strategy? And they said, mate, we don't have a strategy for anything.
Well, maybe that explains it then.
Yeah. That's why we need. That's why
maybe 40% is good.
That's right. That's why we need media consultants. Listen, I'm going to take a quick question from our online audience, from Maryam Phillips, who's a journalism lecturer. What would you suggest is the best way to train new journalists, or I would guess any journalist, frankly, on AI practices?
I can have a go at that.
Please.
So I think before we start talking about AI literacy, I think we should talk about sort of basic numeracy, data literacy, and technical literacy, because I think by far and away that is more important than specifically learning about AI or machine learning or whatever we want to call it. And over the last 5 or 6 years that I've been in journalism, I think that is really the big skill that I've noticed is missing. And this is going to be a bit of a sweeping generalization, and I hope I don't offend any journalists that come from a journalism background, but I have noticed a bit of a tendency for journalists who don't have a technical background, when they see that something has come from a data set, or when they see that something has come from some sort of statistical analysis, I think it's maybe out of fear, but it seems like a lot of the really good critical thinking skills that they know as journalists, like sense checking, looking for another source, all of those good critical thinking skills, they kind of go out the window. And so a big part of the work that I do when I'm trying to train fellow journalists in being a bit more confident with numbers and data is just reminding them that data journalism, or journalism that involves AI, is not fundamentally a different animal to the kind of journalism that you're used to. It's just that instead of interviewing a person, or alongside interviewing a person or an institution, you're interviewing a data set. And if you just translate a lot of those same principles that you learned from traditional journalism into what we call data journalism or AI-driven journalism, that goes a long way. So I think personally, I think those basic numeracy and data skills are more important, and AI literacy is going to flow naturally from that once people are comfortable working with data and numbers.
Would you agree?
I think that you can't, I think actually training the young journalists is going to be the easier bit, because they're already starting to use things like ChatGPT and they're interacting with this new UI naturally. I'm kind of more concerned about educating journalists who've maybe sort of like, 7+ years in, who've kind of now got their ways of working. And I'm sadly I'm still surprised by the low level of understanding about what LLMs are, what AI is, from really senior people who are making strategies. And I mean, it terrifies me sometimes. So I think actually you cannot underestimate how basic you need to get about what AI is, what generative AI is specifically, why it's so different from interpretative AI, and kind of open people's eyes to some of the really fundamental changes that might be coming along. I think that's kind of really the basic. You've got to understand the what before you can start understanding the how or the why or the wherefores.
Yeah, I veer between being hugely impressed by working with people like you. There's this kind of new breed of hybrid people coming in, bringing data science, attitudes and aptitude, as well as knowledge, that idea of collaboration, that idea of process. And that's so encouraging. And I think it's really healthy for journalism in general. Forget the AI bit, and having people who can count, that's always good. That's really good. But on the other hand, yes, you then realize that perhaps for some good reasons, a lot of people have just got no idea. And the journalism around generative AI has been often misleading, I think, George.
Yes, I can't give any advice to training journalists, but just want to shout out some of my FT colleagues, actually. Like, if you haven't seen it, we produced a piece on how ChatGPT works and how transformer models work, and it's an interactive journalism piece. Absolutely genius. But I've had nothing to do with it. But we'll see if we can get like a free link to send it out to the group afterwards, because it's just so clear. Free to read. There you go. We'll send out a link.
Time for another quick question. Anybody? Right at the back. Hang on, it's another.
Hi, Charlie. Sorry.
Hello
again. I absolutely loved the approach in the report of focusing more on the global south. And I think, unfortunately, it probably is true that that gap will widen between the haves and the have-nots. But did you see any evidence to actually suggest the opposite, that potentially in these regions where there is that need, we might see more innovation, and that now tools like GenAI, which are quite accessible and a lot of people, anyone can pick up and play with, that we might actually see innovation coming from those regions?
Yeah. Well, you saw the film, you know, those were people from the so-called Global South, which I think is a rather clunky title, but well, let's go with it. You saw the people in the film, you know, they're absolutely fantastic. And I can't stress how global our organization is. It kind of went that way, not just because we had some patronizing idea that we should be helping the Global South, but because the Global South came to us. And what is really interesting is, as Mira mentioned, a lot of those places don't have very healthy environments for journalism. And what is really impressive is how much independent new forms of journalism are emerging, often around a mission. Editorial mission has got nothing to do with tech, sometimes with the tech. And yes, there's a big divide in terms of they don't have a huge R&D department, and sometimes the internet doesn't work, and sometimes electricity doesn't work, you know, if you're South Africa. But on the other hand, if they can do one good thing with this, it can be transformational. If they can sort out their membership or subscription and automate that, say, wow, that can make 10, 20% difference. And that can be the difference between survival and expansion. And as you saw in the film, it's just some fantastic, there's no shortage of fantastic journalism. It's just enabling it. And I do see that in some ways, there's a bigger benefit for organizations in the Global South than there might be in the Global North, you know. And it's partly we're finding out. Like, the wonderful thing about this project is we've done this survey, but we're continually discovering new things, new use cases, new wonderful people doing incredible things. So, you know, we've got 8,000 people in our network, and a lot of them are from the Global South, and they are very talented, hardworking. And I think they're going to get their little hands on this stuff and do great work with it. One last question, I think.
We can take two.
Two. Oh, if Shepard says we can do two, we're going to do two.
Thank you. My question is quite similar. I was wondering how we could tackle this disparity that exists between the global north and the global south regarding the application of AI in our newsrooms, because there are, even in some regions like South America, there are between countries as Argentina and Peru, for instance, differences in the application of AI. So which could be our starting point to begin something to improve the practice of the journalism with the support of AI?
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else wants to chip in on this one, but again, I don't want to sound too optimistic, because the barriers are just the barriers. They're there. Doesn't matter it's not just journalism, it's anything. There's going to be these economic structural imbalances, okay? Fact. And I'm not saying the tech is some sort of magical solution, but just take one idea, really good translation, automatic, instant, live translation that works, that can detect dialect and difference and different languages. Think how that can transform both the access of a non-English country to the rest of the information sphere, but also vice versa. You know, us being able to understand other languages, if you like, in a much more effective way. You know, so much more advanced than the old iterations of things like Google Translate. So I'm not a techno, you know, miracleist, but I just think that's a bleeding obvious thing that has plagued journalism for so long. And obviously, you know, you're Reuters, you're a global, and, you know, BBC is global as well. And I just find that incredible that, you know, Reuters and the BBC and the FT, of course, can expand, but also other journalists in those other places can get access. I don't know if you want to add anything to the global picture, you know. Yeah, it's work hard for yourself, I think, you know. And we're doing our little bit. We're trying to translate this into Spanish and to Arabic. You know, we're trying very much to I'm the only Brit on the team, so we're trying to rebalance our work as much as possible. But there's so many other fantastic organizations out there. Last question, I think, will have to be over there.
Absolutely brilliant report, and thank you so much for all the insights. I research on feminism and tech at LSE, and I'm also teaching a module this year on data in society, and we are going the old school way. We're not doing ChatGPT there. But I'm wondering, Charlie, in your report, did you look at the survey in terms of responses within gender, whether there was any difference between the way women reacted to the adoption of AI at workplace, because we are all aware of the bias AI has?
No, we didn't.
You didn't? Okay, that would be something that I would be very
We've done stuff in the past where, one of the interesting things was when we started this project, I thought I'm going to be surrounded by blokes for the next 5 years, and it's quite the opposite, actually. That there's something, I can't quantify it, but there is something around this area, and I don't want to do a gender deterministic thing, but there is something about this hybrid working, this more collaborative working and so on, that it's not just the old male dominance of tech, that we've seen in the past. We ran a series of articles about women in journalism and AI, because we were so struck by that. But no, not particularly. No.
I'll just add that one of the other transformations I've lived through and had to lead through was the digital transformation of newsrooms. And I was really, really struck by, when I was doing that, I was surrounded by female editors. And exactly as you said, when we did our workshop, I was expecting that it was going to be very, very male dominated, and it was very female dominated. And I think that there is something about the willingness to take a risk, the entrepreneurial spirit, the fact that we don't see a ladder in front of us as women. We know it's kind of going to be sideways moves to go up, and the like, and the kind of the willingness to step out, because that might be the best way to get up, is to step out into something new. So I don't know about sort of feminism in tech specifically, but feminism in the workplace, I think there are some really interesting patterns around innovation and the role that women play in innovation that I'm now seeing on this second wave. So if you want to do another bit of study, then I would very happily talk to you and introduce you to some amazing women who've been leading change and leading innovation in newsrooms, both with internet, apps, mobile, social, and now AI.
Thanks, Jane.
Listen, I think we're going to wrap it there and head towards drinks. What's that? Yeah, and head towards drinks. I just want to say briefly before we hand back to Jim from the FTstrategies that you can see for yourselves how fantastic these people are. They're doing incredibly good work, and I can promise you there are hundreds and thousands more in our network who are also doing wonderful work. So I'm feeling very optimistic, at least about the human side of the technology. And I invite you all to get involved, get connected with us, and share that future. But first, Jim.
Very much. On behalf of all of us, both in the room and online around the world, I'd like to thank you, everyone in your team, the wonderful panelists tonight, and our partners at GenAI very much for the presentation and the discussion. Copies of the report were available at the back of the room, but I think they've all gone. But of course, they are available on the Polis LSE website, and please do download your copy. If you're able to stay with us after we conclude here in the room, there will be some drinks and canapes served just next door in our cafe restaurant. But before we close down the live stream, if I may quickly trail ahead to another webinar happening next month. So if we can just go to the next slide, please. So 3 weeks' time on October the 10th, again in partnership with GenAI, we'll be bringing together not just one, but 2 panels of experts to talk in more depth about the practicalities of developing and implementing AI in media and news businesses, picking up, of course, on many of the themes in the report you've heard about today. So there's a QR code on the screen. Please do feel free to open your camera phones, register for the event now, and details, of course, will be available on our website as well. But for now, that's it. Thank you once again, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.